Dobro. History. Archive.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are doing a deep dive on a single moment in history.
A single terrible moment.
Right, a disaster that really fundamentally changed the way every single crowded public building on this planet is constructed.
Every stadio, every concert hall, every movie theater you've ever been in.
Exactly. And our source material today is a forensic, almost minute-by-minute analysis of the event. We're talking about the Iroquois Theatre Fire.
In Chicago, December 30th, 1903.
And it is the ultimate historical paradox. What's so fascinating here, and so awful, is the immediate hook.
Right. The Iroquois Theater was Chicago's absolute pride. It was brand new, less than 6 weeks old.
Right.
A monument to the city's, ambition.
And crucially, the architect, the owners, the press, everyone was aggressively marketing it with this one slogan.
A slogan that, in hindsight, is just dripping with betrayal. Absolutely fireproof.
That phrase is just utterly chilling when you know what happens next.
It really is.
Because the shocking reality is that this glittering new venue, during a packed holiday matinee, became the deadliest single-building fire in U.S. history.
And the speed of it is what's so terrifying.
Our sources confirm that within this terrifyingly short window, we're talking maybe 15 to 20 minutes from the first spark, a minor stage fire just exploded.
It became a full-blown catastrophe. At least 602 lives were lost.
And that number, 602, is tragic enough on its own, but when you look at the demographic...
It gets even worse. The audience was overwhelmingly composed of women and children. It was a school holiday show, a matinee.
So connecting this to the bigger picture, this wasn't some random act of fate. This wasn't just bad luck.
No, not at all. It was a tragedy of design and, frankly, criminal negligence.
Indeed. And our mission for this deep dive is to move entirely beyond that simple, kind of passive narrative you sometimes hear of uncontrollable panic or random disaster.
Right, blaming the victims.
Exactly. When you forensically examine the Iroquois, it wasn't fated to burn. It was, as one piece of analysis so perfectly calls it, engineered as a perfect death trap.
A perfect death trap, that's it.
So we're going to expose the interlocking systemic failures that guaranteed the lethal outcome that day.
That's how we can really understand the price that was paid for the safety we all take for granted today. And the sources, they identify a very clear pathology here, a catastrophic triad of failures that all intersected at once.
Okay, so let's lay out that triad, because it's really the framework for our whole discussion.
First, you have what we'll call architectural deception. This is the big lie of fireproof construction, masking just enormous quantities of highly flammable materials inside.
And a total lack of any real way to fight a fire?
None. Second, there was catastrophic mechanical failure. The key safety devices, the fire curtain, and critically the roof vents, they both failed at the same time.
Which was the building's one and only chance at containment.
Gone. And third, systemic egress obstruction. This is a combination of locked doors, bizarrely complicated locks, and a class-based segregation that literally caged the audience inside.
Caged them. It's unbelievable. We really have to dive into each of those layers of failure. All right, so to understand the colossal ego, the sheer hubris that allowed the Iroquois Theater to be built and opened in the state it was in, we have to look at Chicago's immediate past.
You absolutely have to.
This was a city that had already gone through this foundational trauma, the kind that shapes a whole civic psychology, right?
Absolutely. When you talk about Chicago in 1903, you have to remember we are standing only 32 years removed from the Great Chicago Fire of 1871.
A fire that was just legendary in its scale.
Oh, it wasn't just a neighborhood fire. It obliterated the entire central business district. It scarred the city's collective memory, and it forced this comprehensive architectural reckoning.
The lesson Chicago took from 1871 was pretty simple. Wood is a killer.
It's lethal. Exactly. And in those decades after, Chicago rebuilt itself with this determined, almost defiant energy. It completely transformed its skyline.
This is when they started pioneering the steel frame skyscraper.
That's right. Using steel and stone and terracotta and concrete, it was all about promising this total mastery over the elements. Our source material makes this really powerful observation. For Chicago, the term fireproof wasn't just a technical spec.
It was what? A religion?
It was a civic religion. It was a promise to the world, to the economy, that Chicago was back, that it was safe, modern, and absolutely impervious.
And the Iroquois Theater, designed by this prominent architect, Benjamin H. Marshall, was supposed to be the absolute jewel in that crown of confidence.
It embodied it completely. Marshall was deliberately trying to rival the opulence of the grand European opera houses.
Taking cues from places like the Opera Comique in Paris, I read.
Exactly. The facade was constructed of expensive granite and Bedford stone.
Yeah.
It projected this image of absolute, impregnable solidity. When you looked at the Iroquois, you saw safety literally enshrined in stone.
But this is where we start to expose that first part of the triad, the architectural deception. The building was fireproof in the most literal but ultimately totally meaningless sense.
The term was applied with just a dangerously superficial looseness. Yes, the structural shell.
The steel skeleton, the concrete floors.
That was all non-combustible. That part was true. But Marshall's aesthetic vision filled that structural cage with a fuel load that is, frankly, unimaginable today.
So what are we talking about? What was this highly flammable matrix inside the fireproof shell?
Well, you have to picture the interior design of that era of 1903. This wasn't some minimalist auditorium. It was plush, velvet seating, heavy, thick draperies everywhere, intricate mahogany trim, gilded plasterwork.
Sounds beautiful, but also flammable.
Incredibly, and perhaps most lethally, acres and acres of painted canvas scenery. The sources estimate there were over 10,000 square yards of combustible oil-painted fabric hanging directly over the stage.
10,000 square yards, that's like 2 football fields of fuel.
Basically. And these materials, especially the painted canvas, were designed to be lightweight and flexible for the stage, not fire-resistant.
So the confidence in the massive stone exterior just lulled everyone into this fatal complacency. They focus on the shell, but they completely ignore the contents.
That is the absolute core of the architectural lie.
Yeah.
The Iroquois proved that structural integrity meant nothing without internal protection.
And the sources hammer this point home with an analogy that just sticks with you.
What's that?
The building proved that a fireproof stove can still incinerate the dinner cooked inside it.
Wow.
The structure itself didn't burn, but the contents and the audience certainly did. The design did absolutely nothing to protect the people from the massive fuel load they were sitting right next to.
Okay, so we have the hubris of the design. But that building could not have opened its doors without the active complicity of the city government.
No way.
And this moves us right into the issue of commerce, corruption, and this just ruthless rush to open. The timeline for the Iroquois was dictated entirely by commercial greed. It just overrode every single safety metric you can imagine. The owners, including a man named Will J. Davis and this hugely powerful theater syndicate, 𝐏𝐻𝐃 and Erlanger.
They saw the holidays coming?
Exactly. Thanksgiving and Christmas. They saw it as an unmissable river of revenue. They had to be open to capture that lucrative holiday traffic.
And that urgency meant they just blew past every single warning sign.
Blew past them. They bulldozed right over them. Labor disputes had plagued the construction all through 1903, so the project was severely behind schedule.
They opened anyway.
They did. Despite visible incompletion, especially in the crucial back-of-house areas like the stage rigging, the lighting, the dressing rooms, they pushed that opening date forward. The theater opened prematurely on November 23, 1903.
So for 5 weeks, the patrons were sitting in what was still essentially a construction site in the most dangerous parts of the building.
A very fancy, very deadly construction site.
And this premature opening, this blatant disregard for safety, was all facilitated by the infamous Chicago political machine, which was under Mayor Carter Harrison Jr. at the time.
Yes.
This is where the corruption, the graft, becomes a literal life or death problem.
It was a deeply, deeply poisoned system. The building commissioner, George Williams, and his army of safety inspectors, these weren't professionals hired for their expertise.
They were political appointees.
Exactly. Their loyalty was to the party machine that gave them the job, not to any public safety laws. So city ordinances about fire equipment, exit signs, fire curtains, they were just openly violated. And the violations were protected by a very simple system of transaction.
We're not just talking about a little cash payoff, are we?
No, it was more insidious than that. The currency that bought immunity from proper inspection was free tickets.
Free tickets.
Stacks of them. Providing complimentary tickets to city officials, police officers, their families. That was just standard operating procedure. This wasn't a perk, it was an implicit contract. We give you entertainment, you give us immunity from inspection. The currency wasn't cash, it was civic complicity. It poisoned the entire system of public safety from the top down.
And that detail turns the entire idea of a safety inspection into what the source calls a performative ritual.
That's the perfect phrase for it. We have specific damning evidence of this. An inspector named William Curran was sent to tour the building. And Curran, in this chilling testament to the era's criminal incompetence, actually visited the theater just 10 minutes before the fire broke out.
10 minutes before, and what did he say?
He declared it a fine theater. He focused purely on the opulent lobby, the marble, the impressive granite facade, the aesthetics.
Which means he completely missed the sealed fence, the lack of sprinklers, the 10,000 yards of flammable canvas hanging over the stage.
He missed everything that mattered. The inspection was purely for show. It was a rubber stamp of approval designed to satisfy a political requirement, but it was utterly meaningless in technical terms. The building opened because the politicians were protected and the owners were in a hurry.
So with that context set, the hubris, the flammable guts, the systemic corruption, let's pivot now to the specific architectural details that turned the Iroquois into that perfect death trap.
Let's do it.
We have to start with the capacity and the truly lethal class-based segregation that was woven into the building's very design.
The Iroquois was massive. It was designed to seat 1,602 people. But critically, that audience was vertically stratified by price. It was a perfect reflection of the era's deep class divisions.
So you had the wealthy on the main floor.
Right, in the orchestra seats, paying up to $2 a ticket. Then you had the middle class in the dress circle, the first balcony. And then way up in the third tier, this incredibly steep gallery, often derisively called the gods.
And tickets there were, what, 50 cents?
50 cents.
And the architecture itself reinforced this social stratification. It created bottlenecks that would have been dangerous even without a fire.
Precisely. The architect, Benjamin Marshall, he prioritized the feeling of grandeur over the logic of efficient egress. The main foyer was vast, 60 by 80 feet. But the main way to get to the upper levels was this incredibly complex, sweeping, grand staircase.
Described as Escher-like in one source.
It was. It looked spectacular, but it funneled the entire audience into one single primary choke point. In an emergency, this beautiful structure was actually designed to restrict movement, not facilitate it.
And here's the detail that the analysis identifies as one of the most cynical and deadly decisions: the locked gates. This wasn't an accident, it was an intentional barrier.
It was the management's desire to protect revenue over human life, made physical in iron and steel, to prevent patrons who had paid the cheap 50-cent gallery price from sneaking down into the dress circle or orchestra.
Which was a common practice at the time.
A very common practice. So to stop them, they installed these massive floor-to-ceiling iron accordion gates across the stairways that connected the tiers. And the house rule was simple. These gates were locked once the performance began.
So if there's a crisis, the people in the highest, cheapest seats, the people who are already furthest from safety, were literally caged in a dead-end corridor.
That is the grim ethical realization of that design. They were sealed in. Unless a specific staff member in the middle of a fire with smoke and screaming had the presence of mind to find the right key and get to that gate, those people were trapped. This one act of prioritizing revenue protection created the single highest concentration of fatalities in the entire building.
Just unbelievable. Okay, let's move to the second critical failure point, the fireproof curtain itself. In any theater, the fire curtain is supposed to be the absolute last line of defense.
It's the firewall.
Right. If a fire starts on the stage, the curtain's supposed to drop, seal the proscenium arch, and protect the audience.
That's the theory, and the law demanded it. Standard practice at the time involved a heavy, wire-woven curtain made of steel or pure asbestos. It was designed to be a real thermal firewall. It should have held back a fire for at least 20 minutes, more than enough time for a calm evacuation.
But the Iroquois curtain was a fake. It was a complete counterfeit. How deep did the deception go with its composition?
It was a fatal deception, driven entirely by cost-cutting. Post-fire forensic analysis revealed it wasn't a solid asbestos weave at all. It was this flimsy composite material.
Made of what?
Wood pulp and cotton, mostly, infused with just a minimal percentage of true asbestos fiber. It was essentially a heavily reinforced paper barrier, not a robust shield. And to compound that material failure, it was hung on a wooden batten instead of a strong, dedicated steel support rod.
So the support structure itself was flammable.
It was.
And even if it had been made of the right stuff, the mechanism itself was flawed. This is where the smallest detail becomes absolutely lethal.
The mechanical flaw was so insidious. The curtain was supposed to drop quickly and smoothly, but it ran on these wooden tracks that were unlubricated and misaligned because of the rush to finish construction. But the single detail that doomed it was human error combined with a design oversight.
The light fixture.
The light fixture, a hinged light fixture, A reflector trough had been swung out by a stagehand to illuminate a prop, and it was never retracted.
So when the curtain was finally ordered down after the fire started, it just snagged.
It did. It stopped partway down, jamming on that protruding light fixture, and just hung there uselessly. It left this substantial, crucial gap at the bottom and along the sides, an opening big enough to ensure that containment failed completely. That gap guaranteed that the stage, once it turned into an inferno, would communicate directly with the auditorium.
Which brings us to what the sources identify as the single most critical technical failure of all.
The big one.
The missing lungs of the theater, the sealed smoke vents. If the snagged curtain was the first line of defense, these vents were supposed to be the second, and arguably the most important from a fire dynamics perspective.
This is where we need to draw on the seminal scientific analysis by this brilliant fire protection engineer, John R. Freeman, in his 1906 report. Freeman's work fundamentally changed how we design theaters forever.
And we have to understand the physics of a stage house.
Yes. Architecturally, it is a vertical chimney.
So in a fire, physics dictates that the smoke and all those superheated gases have to be drawn upward and out.
Precisely. If a fire starts on stage, these flues, or roof vents, have to open instantly. Usually they work with a fusible link that just melts in the heat, that draws the heat and the gases up and away from the proscenium arch. If the flue is open, the smoke rises, and the auditorium remains a lower-pressure, survivable environment, giving people a window to get out.
And the Iroquois was designed with skylights that were supposed to do this, right?
Yes. The skylights were meant to act as the vents. They were designed to open automatically. But what did investigators find when they finally got up on that ruined roof and examined the wreckage?
They were rendered useless.
Completely useless.
And the motive for this was it was incredibly banal. It wasn't malice, just simple convenience.
The sources confirm this. The stagehands, or the maintenance crew, they were annoyed by the famously vicious Chicago winter wind, which was causing the vents to rattle.
Or maybe they were worried about snow getting in and damaging the expensive sets.
Either way, their solution was simple. They just nailed the vents shut, or, in some cases, wire them down. A decision made for convenience, to silence a rattle or avoid a draft, completely and utterly transformed the life safety architecture of the entire building.
The consequence of that one simple action, a few nails, is what turned a localized stage fire into a mass casualty event.
It was absolutely catastrophic because the stage was sealed at the top, and because panicked, stagehands would soon throw open the large rear freight doors to the alley.
To escape.
Right. The superheated stage house was instantly transformed. Instead of acting as a chimney, it became what one expert called a pressurized cannon aimed directly at the auditorium. The expanding superheated gases had nowhere to go but out horizontally, right under the gap left by that snagged curtain, blasting directly into the audience.
It's just chilling to realize that a few nails defeated the fundamental physics of fire safety and caused hundreds of deaths.
It is the ultimate lesson in humility for engineers. All the granite and steel in the world cannot compensate when a basic principle of thermodynamics is ignored for the sake of quiet.
And finally, let's just quickly review the total absence of active fire suppression systems. They relied so heavily on the lie of fireproof material that they had almost nothing in place for when a fire actually started.
They lacked every single necessary modern system. First, and most shockingly, there were 0 automatic sprinklers installed over the stage.
Which, with that much scenery, is just professional negligence.
It's unbelievable. So the fire grew completely unchecked in those crucial first minutes. Second, there were no manual fire alarm boxes connected directly to the city network. A stagehand had to physically run out of the building and find a pull box on the street, which delayed the fire department's response.
And the only actual suppression equipment they had on hand? It sounds like a joke.
It was worse than useless. They had the infamous kill fire tubes.
What are those?
They were essentially tin tubes filled primarily with sodium bicarbonate baking soda powder. The instructions literally required the user to forcibly hurl the powder at the base of the flames.
So you're supposed to throw baking soda at a blaze that's starting 20 feet up in the fly gallery.
It was utterly impotent. It was a token piece of equipment designed to look compliant, but not to actually fight a real fire.
Okay, now we move from the systemic failures in the design to the timeline of the catastrophe itself. The matinee performance of Mr. Bluebeard. It was a bitterly cold day outside, near 0 degrees, but inside the theater, the atmosphere was charged with holiday festivity.
The theater was packed beyond its legal capacity. The show was this spectacular London musical import, and the owner's greed had, commercially speaking, paid off. Estimates put the attendance somewhere between 2,100 and 2,300 people.
Far exceeding the legal 1,602 seating capacity.
By a lot. And crucially, the sources note that the aisles and the backs of the tiers were notoriously clogged with standees, patrons who had paid for standing room-only tickets.
And the demographic detail here is so critical to understanding the tragedy.
It was overwhelmingly women and children. It was a school holiday matinee of a show they called a fairy play. This means mothers, aunts, and grandmothers had brought younger children. When the fire began, this demographic reality meant children lacked the physical strength to navigate the crush that followed.
And mothers, acting on that primal protective instinct, refused to abandon their children.
Which is why forensic recovery teams later found these large, dense clusters of bodies tightly packed together. Mother and child often fused in death.
So the stage is set, literally and figuratively. At approximately 3:15 p.m., during the musical number in the pale moonlight, the spark occurs.
And the initial spark was shockingly simple. It came from a calcium arc light, a very powerful, focused light source located high up in the stage right fly gallery. It short-circuited, and a little flame, a little spark, fluttered down and caught the frayed edge of a muslin border.
A piece of hanging scenery that, as we discussed, was painted with highly flammable oil-based paint.
Instantly flammable. A stagehand, William McMullen, sees it.
But it's just out of his reach.
He tried valiantly to slap it out with a pole, but he couldn't reach it. The firemen on duty, in a moment of utter helplessness, tried to deploy the only thing they had, the kill fire tube. But because the fire was so high up in the flies, the powder just dispersed harmlessly in the air, far above the flame. The fire, which was initially minor, began to race across the dry, highly flammable Kansas drops hanging above the stage in seconds.
What makes this moment so surreal is the reaction on the stage. The sources say the cast just kept performing.
The discipline of the show must go on proved catastrophically counterproductive. The double octet, which was the main vocal chorus for the production, they noticed the flames. But the orchestra, led by conductor Herbert Delia, just kept playing the gentle, lulling melody of In the Pale Moonlight.
It created this terrifying juxtaposition, this light, innocent waltz playing against an escalating inferno just feet away.
And then the star performer, Eddie Foy, a massive vaudeville star at the time, was in his dressing room but rushed out. His quick thinking is often credited with saving some lives, even if he couldn't stop the inevitable.
What did he do?
Foy displayed remarkable presence of mind. He immediately sent his own young son, Brian, into the care of a stagehand to be rushed out the back. Then he ran to the footlights, stood in front of the growing flames, and shouted this desperate plea to the audience. Don't get excited. There's no danger. Take it easy.
And he told the orchestra to play something else.
Right. He ordered them to switch abruptly to a vigorous waltz, hoping the familiarity of the rhythm would somehow soothe and organize the rising panic in the crowd. And at the same time, he was screaming for the fire curtain to be lowered.
And that is the exact moment the systemic failure locks into place, completely overriding human courage.
The curtain began its descent, but the mechanical flaw proved fatal. It snagged immediately on that protruding light reflector and just stopped halfway down. It hung there uselessly, swaying slightly in the building's drafts, neither a thermal barrier nor a defense. Containment had failed.
But the true catastrophic turning point, the point where the death toll just soared, was the flashover. And it was driven by the stagehand's flight.
This is the critical physics moment. As discipline completely broke down backstage, the stagehands and performers fled en masse. They threw open the large freight doors that led to Couch Place, the alley behind the theater. And that sudden massive rush of cold winter air into the superheated sealed stagehouse created a violent pressure differential.
And because the roof vents were nailed shut, the stage was a sealed container, all that superheated gas had only one way to escape.
Exactly. The expanding gases, mixed with smoke and fire, consolidated into this massive concussive fireball. Eddie Foy described it as a literal cyclone that violently exploded horizontally into the auditorium. It rushed under the gap left by the snagged curtain, blasting over the heads of the audience. The instantaneous heat was estimated to be over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
That level of heat kills through thermal shock alone.
Many in the upper tiers, especially the gallery, died instantly where they sat, just from that wave of superheated gas. Simultaneously, the intensely dry, painted canvas scenery high in the flies ignited fully and began raining burning debris down onto the first few rows of the audience.
And then the lights went out.
To compound the horror, the fire instantly consumed the main electrical switchboard, plunging the entire windowless auditorium into absolute darkness. The only light was the terrifying, expanding orange glare of the fire itself.
The darkness, the fire, the screams that triggered the primal panic we talked about.
The transition was immediate and violent. Those standees who were clogging the aisles instantly became fixed, impossible obstacles. The crowd surge was immense. Forensic analysis and survivor accounts confirmed that the physical pressure of the crush was so great that it was sufficient to asphyxiate victims through chest compression before they ever even reached the flames or the doors. The fight for survival was fatal in and of itself.
And their efforts to escape were foiled by this incomprehensible engineering choice: the bascule lock failure.
This is a classic, horrifying example of form over function. The emergency exits were fitted with a complex European mechanism called a bascule or espagnolette lock. It's a vertical rod running the height of the door, and it's all controlled by one small, unintuitive lever. In normal times, they looked sophisticated.
But in a blinding panic, the natural human instinct is not to delicately manipulate a lever.
It's to push.
It's just to push.
And that pushing motion was precisely what doomed them. When the terrified crowd pressed against the doors, their natural survival-driven force, friction, locked the bascule mechanism, making the door physically impossible to open. Survivors reported seeing victims tearing at the tiny levers with bleeding hands while being crushed against the wood, unable to operate this unintuitive hardware under the immense weight of the surging crowd.
So if the main floor was chaos, the gallery, because of those locked gates, was a slaughterhouse.
The caging effect of the architectural segregation was tragically realized. As the fireball and smoke hit the upper tier, their only escape was the main stairway. But there, they ran headlong into those locked accordion gates, the iron barriers installed to protect ticket revenue.
Trapped by a 50-cent ticket policy.
That's the brutal truth of it. The crowd just piled up against the barriers. Firefighters later encountered this horrific scene in that corridor. A solid wall of bodies, stacked 7 or 8 feet high, literally intertwined in the bars of the iron gate. This one corridor had the single highest density of fatalities in the entire building, a direct, unforgiving result of management prioritizing profit protection over human life.
And for those who did manage to find an emergency exit on the north side of the theater, they faced a different kind of horrific fate in what became known as Death Alley.
Couch Place. It was quickly and morbidly renamed. The emergency exits there led to exterior iron fire escapes. But when patrons finally forced these doors open, they faced a dual horror.
What happened?
First, the escape platforms themselves were unfinished, narrow, and often coated in ice from the sub-zero temperatures. Second, and much more deadly, the draft created by opening those lower doors sucked flames and superheated gas out of the building, instantly engulfing the metal platforms above.
So people were literally cooked alive on the metal gratings, or they were forced to take a desperate, lethal leap.
Bodies began to literally rain down into the alley. Initially, people died on impact, but the horrifying density of the pile of bodies quickly grew high enough that it actually began to cushion the fall of those who followed, trapping them in this gruesome, growing pile.
Yet, amidst that absolute chaos, there was one incredible, impromptu act of salvation that just captures the human spirit fighting back.
It's an amazing anecdote. Workers in the nearby Northwestern University building across the alley, many of them painters on a break, saw the disaster unfolding.
And they acted.
Acting purely on instinct, they managed to extend a long plank and a ladder across the gap, from their window to the theater's fire escape. A small handful of people, maybe only a dozen, managed to crawl across that makeshift bridge, suspended high above the carnage, and reach safety. They faced down the absolute horror and created their own egress system.
Finally, we can't overlook the unique tragedy faced by the performers themselves, especially an aerialist named Nellie Reed.
Nellie Reed's story is particularly heartbreaking. She was a principal aerialist, performing a specialty known as the aerial ballet. She was suspended high above the stage on wires during the initial moments of the fire.
So she couldn't just run out the stage door like the chorus members. She was literally tethered to the burning structure.
She was part of the show's architecture. When the flames exploded in the flies, that burning forest of scenery and rigging, she was trapped. Conflicting reports make her fate tragic. She was either stranded until the intense heat melted the rigging mechanism, dropping her to the stage, or she managed to reach a dressing room only to be found severely burned.
Did she survive?
She was evacuated from the building, but she succumbed to her injuries a few days later. Her death really underscored the unique and profound peril faced by anyone who was physically connected to the highly combustible performance architecture of that theater.
The fire itself burned out relatively quickly once it consumed all the flammable interior materials. When Fire Chief Musham's men finally entered the building, maybe less than half an hour later, the silence must have been absolute, a deafening contrast to the screams just minutes before.
The sources describe that entry in chilling detail. Chief Musham's men moving through the ruin in deafening silence. The recovery effort was agonizing and deeply gruesome. Bodies at the exits were so tightly packed and crushed that they had to be literally pried apart. Due to the high number of female victims, police matrons had to be called in from across the city just to assist with the recovery and handling.
And the identification process was a citywide nightmare. It transformed the entire neighborhood into an improvised morgue.
Exactly. Saloons, department stores, even restaurants on State Street were quickly requisitioned. They just lined up rows and rows of bodies for identification. The trauma hit the city so hard, especially because of the sheer number of child victims. The Chicago Tribune published these special editions with just pages of lists of the dead, sometimes only identifiable by a piece of jewelry or a fragment of clothing, an almost impossible task given the degree of thermal damage and crushing.
An immediate coroner's inquest was held, and the testimony was predictably damning. It exposed all the corruption we detailed earlier.
The accountability was laid bare. Building Inspector Edward Laughlin admitted under oath he had never once actually tested the fire curtain. Stagehands confessed openly that the vents were nailed shut for convenience. The systemic failures were all proven through testimony.
But the true scientific understanding of why the tragedy was so lethal came a bit later.
Right, with the publication of the definitive John R. Freeman report in 1906.
Freeman, this pivotal figure in fire protection engineering, he didn't rely on testimony. He modeled the fire dynamics.
His analysis provided the empirical, scientific proof that this catastrophe was not unavoidable. Freeman calculated, with absolute certainty, that had the roof vents been open, the draft would have pulled the fire, smoke, and heat vertically. It would have maintained a survivable environment in the auditorium long enough for all 1,602 patrons to evacuate safely.
He also scientifically debunked the myth that the fireproof curtain had any value if it wasn't properly guided, sealed, and robustly constructed.
Absolutely.
So the science proved, beyond any doubt, that 602 people died because of criminal intentional negligence. The sealed vents, the fake curtain, the locked doors. But the legal system, as we know, often fails to connect scientific proof to criminal liability.
And this is the ultimate betrayal that just cemented the public cynicism. Despite the devastating death toll, the public outcry, and the scientific proof, the justice system failed completely. Indictments for manslaughter were handed down against key figures, including the owner, Will J. Davis, and even Mayor Carter Harrison, Jr.
But justice was expertly and ruthlessly denied.
It was.
Will J. Davis was defended by an attorney named Levy Mayer, whose legal tactics should be studied as a masterclass in deflection and obstruction. What were the main prongs of his strategy?
Mayer was relentless and highly effective at using procedural law to shield his client. First, there was a change of venue. Mayer successfully argued that the Chicago jury pool was too tainted by grief and vengeance, and he managed to move the trial hundreds of miles away to Peoria, Illinois.
Which immediately removed the emotional immediacy of the crime from the jury's deliberation.
Instantly.
That seems like a smart, but, maybe an obvious tactic. What was his second, more technical, and frankly just stunning legal defense?
That was the ordnance defense. This is where it gets really complicated and cynical. Mayer argued that even though the city demanded these safety features, the sprinklers, the curtain, the outward swinging doors, the city itself had failed to properly legalize those demands.
Wait, what does that even mean?
It means they hadn't correctly published or harmonized the local ordinances with state laws. There were paperwork errors.
So the defense was essentially that the city's own clerical error negated mass murder.
That is precisely the argument. Mayer claimed that violating a local ordinance that was technically invalid or null due to poor legislative procedure could not legally constitute the criminal negligence required for a manslaughter conviction. It was a stunning legal maneuver that focused entirely on procedural minutia rather than ethical responsibility.
And the third defense was the classic tactic of shifting the blame onto the victims themselves.
The panic defense. The defense subtly but forcefully argued that the tragedy's lethality wasn't the fault of the physical failures, the sealed vents, the fake curtain, the locked doors, but rather the victim's own hysterical reaction, the uncontrollable panic of the crowd.
Which completely ignores the fact that the locked doors and the sudden fireball are what caused the panic in the first place.
Exactly, the panic which then turned fatal because of the architectural defects.
And the result of Mayer's maneuvers combining procedure, distance, and blame shifting was just bitter cynicism across Chicago.
Absolute cynicism. Will J. Davis was acquitted in 1907. A judge quashed the indictments against all the city officials, including the mayor. No one served a single day in prison for the deaths of 602 people. It remains this painful, indelible footnote in Chicago history that confirms the cynical maxim that in that era, clout and procedural manipulation always trumped justice.
But where the legal system failed so spectacularly, the regulatory response succeeded. The victim's blood truly did become the ink of modern building codes, transforming the built environment globally.
That is the enduring, positive legacy. The response in engineering and in regulation was immediate and profound, forcing changes that we all benefit from today. The Iroquois Fire is directly responsible for mandatory safety features in nearly every public assembly building worldwide.
And the most tangible legacy, the one you interact with every single day, is the panic bar. And this story centers on an Indianapolis hardware salesman named Carl Prinzler.
Prinzler was actually scheduled to attend that very matinee, but he missed it because of a last-minute conflict. He was haunted by the photos and the report showing victims crushed against the Iroquois' friction-locked doors, trapped by those unintuitive bascule mechanisms.
He became obsessed.
Completely obsessed with solving that fundamental paradox. How do you secure a door from the outside while guaranteeing it instantly and intuitively opens from the inside during a panic?
He partnered with an architect, Henry H. DuPont, to solve the mechanics.
They worked together, and by 1908, they patented the very first panic exit device. That simple horizontal bar that when you press it anywhere along its length, instantly retracts the latch and allows the door to swing open. They marketed it through the Vonnegut Hardware Company, coining the name Von Duprin.
Vonnegut, DuPont, and Prinzler.
That's it, Von Duprin.
So the panic bar, that piece of hardware we barely even notice, it became a silent guardian born directly from the tragedy of the Iroquois victims. But the regulatory changes went far beyond just the doors.
Oh, they rewrote the entire rulebook for assembly buildings based on that triad of failures. The failures at the Iroquois created immediate, non-negotiable mandates. First, all egress doors were mandated to swing outward in the direction of travel,
making it physically impossible for a crowd crush to friction lock them.
Right. Second, exit signs had to be brightly illuminated and powered by an independent source, a battery or a separate circuit, to prevent the disorientation that happened when the main switchboard failed and plunged the theater into darkness.
The curtain standards must have been overhauled.
Radically upgraded, requiring rigorous high-temperature testing for steel and asbestos compositions, mandatory automatic deployment systems, and crucially, a fail-safe guide system to ensure a proper seal. And finally, local authorities began strictly enforcing maximum occupancy limits. The corrupt practice of blocking aisles with standees was criminalized.
The Iroquois really remains the benchmark for assembly occupancy disasters. It's often compared to other horrific events, but it has a unique place in fire safety history.
It's often compared to the 𝐏𝐿𝐃 fire in Boston in 1942, which claimed 492 lives and also involved flammable decor and blocked exits. But the Iroquois tragedy specifically highlighted the danger inherent in proscenium architecture. The stage is a massive vertical fire risk. That tragedy led directly to the mandate for mandatory, functioning, and automatically deployable roof vents atop every single theater fly tower in the world today. It forced fire engineers globally to respect the physics of the chimney effect.
So when we look back at this devastating event, the Iroquois Theatre Fire wasn't a tragedy of fate. It was a tragedy built on layers of graft, greed, and catastrophic shortcuts.
Absolutely.
It was the direct result of prioritizing the appearance of safety, the marble, the velvet, the fireproof slogans over the non-negotiable mechanics of safety, the vents, the suppression, and the clear egress routes.
602 lives, predominantly women and children attending a simple holiday musical, paid the ultimate price for the city's endemic corruption and the owner's ruthless pursuit of profit. And no individual was ever held criminally liable.
Today, the site of the Iroquois Theatre is the James M. Nederlander Theater. Couch Place, which earned that grim nickname Death Alley, is now just a quiet, brick-paved path. The physical scars are gone, but the engineering legacy is everywhere.
The victim's memory isn't preserved in a statue or a plaque, it's preserved in the safety of the living. Every time you walk into a crowded public building, a stadium, a concert hall, a museum, a movie theater, you are protected by layers of law and engineering born directly from the Iroquois fire.
The safety mechanisms we take entirely for granted, the horizontal panic bars on the exit doors, the glowing independent exit sign above your head, the mandatory vents that protect the stage house, they were all purchased with the lives lost on that freezing December afternoon in 1903. They are silent guardians, constant reminders that the cost of convenience is so often paid in human life.
The Iroquois was the Titanic of theaters. It proved that nothing is absolutely safe unless that safety is engineered, enforced, and continuously audited. It taught us that you cannot trust the slogan, you have to trust the mechanics.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to consider. Those safety mechanisms are meant to be pushed, tested, and relied upon, not ignored. The law dictates that those paths must remain clear and the equipment must be functional. But eternal vigilance is ultimately required by every single patron. The next time you walk into a crowded venue, where's the nearest emergency exit? And what systems of safety are you relying on today that might, in fact, be secretly compromised by convenience or cost, just like the Iroquois?